Trigger warning. This episode contains discussions of sexual assault allegations, violence, and death involving real individuals. While no explicit details are shared, the content may be distressing to some listeners, especially survivors. Please take care as you listen.
Welcome to a special crossover episode of The Wanted Files
and Stars of the Golden Age.
2 shows, 2 different lenses, 1 story that changed Hollywood forever.
I'll take you into the life and legacy of one of silent film's biggest stars, and the woman whose death cast a long shadow over early Hollywood.
And I'll walk you through the mystery, the media circus, and the trial that followed, where justice may have slipped through the cracks.
Fame, power, scandal.
This is the case of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle.
Fatty Arbuckle, one of Hollywood's silent era's most famous film stars. A man who could have had it all, who did have it all. But that fame, prestige, wealth, and power was torn away in an instant. Fatty Arbuckle wasn't born Fatty, of course. He was born Roscoe Conkling Arbuckle on March 24th, 1887. On the family farm in Smith Center, Kansas. Roscoe was the 5th child for William and Mary Arbuckle, and they sadly later had a 6th child who died at birth. The childhoods of Roscoe and his siblings was tough. Their home on the Kansas farm was described as a primitive sod house. Always chasing opportunity, William packed up his large family and headed west. After a long 1,100-mile horse-drawn wagon journey westward, the Arbuckle family landed in Santa Ana, California, about 30 miles south of Los Angeles. William Arbuckle was an alcoholic, a mean alcoholic. He was never able to find his way in life or find a suitable manner in which to support his family. Soon after that long journey west, William left. He went to Northern California, looking yet again for new work opportunities. He would remain gone for most of Roscoe's childhood, rarely showing his face back in Santa Ana. The abandonment of his father would forever haunt Fatty Arbuckle. Roscoe's older siblings were eventually all gone, and his oldest sister Lola tragically died as a very young adult. Mary Arbuckle and her son, Roscoe, were now a team faced with the greatest challenge imaginable every single day: survival. Because he was responsible for helping his mother at home and entering the workforce as a child just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, Roscoe was never able to form the typical friendships that most children are able to have. Something children need to have in order to grow socially and emotionally. He spent much of his time all alone, and he rarely attended school after the 2nd grade. Roscoe was a naturally large child. There is a rumor which dates back over a century now that he weighed 16 pounds at the time of his birth. Of course, this can't be true, and I'm pretty sure they weren't weighing babies back in the sod house on the farm. Roscoe was definitely not overeating. Quite the contrary, there was never enough to eat. He was just naturally large. Children can be harsh, as we know, so Roscoe Arbuckle earned the name of Fatty pretty early on in life. He hated it. As was extremely common in future Hollywood stars who were living in a sad childhood, Roscoe would sneak into theaters to escape from his reality and enter into the magical worlds presented through vaudeville acts. And he happened to be in the right place at the right time one afternoon when a child was needed to play a part in which the original child actor did not show up for. The part was that of a black child, So Fatty Arbuckle's acting debut was performed at 8 years old in blackface. With this chance encounter, Fatty Arbuckle became the #1 child stage actor in town, and he was earning 50 cents per week for his work. It was a good thing he launched this early career in acting, because when he was 12 years old, his mother died. Roscoe Arbuckle was all alone in the world. Skipping ahead to Hollywood. After working his way through small stages, train stations, street corners, eventually the larger vaudeville circuit, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle arrived in Hollywood, now a married man, in the summer of 1909 at the age of 22. His first film was the 1909 silent film Ben's Kid. Fatty Arbuckle was a huge movie star in no time. He was appearing in non-stop comedic films, was a huge film star, and he was insanely wealthy. By the age of 34, he had appeared in over 150 films and directed 78. In a time when many people didn't even own a car, Fatty Arbuckle had a fleet of automobiles, including a Cadillac, a Rolls-Royce, and a limousine. He was the second most popular movie star and the second richest, only topped by Charlie Chaplin. Fatty Arbuckle was on top of the world. He had climbed mountains to get from his orphaned early life with no friends to being one of the most sought-after people in the whole world. Nothing could stop him, until it did. Arbuckle needed a break from his hectic career. A short trip to San Francisco over the long Labor Day weekend of 1921 would be just what he needed. He and his wife had been separated for 4 years by this time, and he didn't really want to go alone. His best friend was another famous film star, Buster Keaton, but he and his wife were sailing to Catalina Island that weekend. In fact, they had invited Arbuckle to join them. He should have joined them. Instead, he drove to San Francisco with 2 men who weren't particularly close friends, but the 2 were deep in the party scene, and Fatty Arbuckle was looking to let loose and party. The men were Fred Fishback and Lowell Sherman. Upon arriving in San Francisco, they checked into the top floor of the exquisite Hotel St. Francis, one of the most luxurious hotels in the western United States. They had the interconnecting rooms 1219, 1220, and 1221. And best of all, during a time of prohibition, the hotel had a fully stocked speakeasy in the basement, which the 3 men would definitely be dipping into. They found their parties, and then they wanted to have their own party on the 3rd day. They decided to have their own party in their hotel suite on the afternoon of September 5th, 1921, Labor Day. Music played on the Victrola, gin and scotch flowed freely, the air was filled with laughter and dancing. It was a grand afternoon. Virginia Rappe, the woman who lost her life in this scandal, but the person who's often forgotten, left shadowed by the fame of the person accused of her death. Virginia Caroline Rappe was born in Chicago on July 1st, 1891. Although she shaved a few years off her life down the road, so her birth year is often reported as 1895. Virginia's mother Mabel was a teenager when she was born, and Virginia never knew her father. Mabel did some modeling and chorus girl work, and she had fallen in a bad crowd, which had ended with her in jail on a couple of occasions. Needless to say, Virginia's childhood was not ideal, especially because Mabel died when she was 29 years old. Virginia Rappe, like Fatty Arbuckle, was an orphan at 11 years old. Virginia Rappe was described as, quote, a rollicking schoolgirl addicted to roller skates, short skirts, bobbed hair, and athletic sports of all kinds, end quote. She sounds pretty rad to me, especially when we're talking about the turn of the century. At 16 years old, she became a model. In the fall of 1912, Virginia and two friends moved from Chicago to New York City to pursue the more lucrative modeling opportunities there. Within a year, Virginia was a full-time model who traveled extensively for fashion shows. While the average U.S. salary was $1,300 per year, Virginia Rappe was earning $4,000 per year. In 1914, 23-year-old Virginia Rappe launched her own clothing line. Her plan was to have it debut at the following year's World's Fair in San Francisco. She was a keen promoter of her clothing line and a remarkable businesswoman. She was an advocate for women's liberation and for world peace, and those passions bled through in the clothing she designed. Her pieces were beautiful, practical, and original, all in one. In 1916, like many other young women looking for what Mary Pickford had, Virginia moved to Los Angeles. She landed her first silent film role the following spring, the lead role in 1917's Paradise Garden. She had a few boyfriends, but nothing really stuck. 2 years after her arrival in Hollywood, she began dating Fox Films' head of comedy, Henry Lerman. She had been living a pretty good life, but now she was living like a queen, limousine and all. And Henry was casting her in tons of his movies. The relationship ended 3 years later in 1921 when Henry followed career opportunities in New Jersey, which was the original film capital of America. Virginia Rappe turned 30 that year, and she was at a turning point in her life. Her acting career had been damaged by the roles her boyfriend was giving her. Everyone assumed she was getting them solely because of her connection to him. Her clothing line had fizzled out, and she was aging out of the modeling world. As she pondered what to do next in her life, she was invited on a little trip to San Francisco with a publicist friend named Alfred Semnacher and his friend Maud Delmont. Circumstances in her life had left her at this exact moment to have no pressing obligations or engagements, to be at a point where she was looking for the next big thing in her life, a point where a little trip out of town may fuel her creative spirit. These are the circumstances that led to the end of her life. With no concrete plans on the Monday of that Labor Day weekend in San Francisco, Virginia and her travel companions received an invitation to a little afternoon soiree at the hotel of 3 other visiting guests from LA, director Fred Fishback and actors Lowell Sherman and Fatty Arbuckle. The Hotel St. Francis. Would they care to join the party? Accounts of guests at the party say Arbuckle was annoyed at the spontaneous afternoon party in their room, that his suite mates had invited all of the guests, mostly women, and that he wasn't interested in socializing that day. In fact, he had never even dressed that day. He wore pajamas and a plush purple robe. As the afternoon progressed, a delivery man delivered ice, orange juice, food, and 12 additional bottles of liquor. Most everyone was heavily intoxicated, but it's hard to say for sure who and how much. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle and Virginia Rappe were seen seated on the sofa for a while talking. Just before 3:00 p.m., Virginia Rappe went to use the bathroom in room 1219, Fatty Arbuckle's room. While she was in the bathroom, Arbuckle entered the room, shut the door, and locked it.
But what really happened behind that locked door is where the mystery begins. Virginia collapsed not long after arriving at the party. Witnesses said she screamed in pain, clutching her stomach. Some claimed she had been drinking heavily, others said she hadn't touched a drop. The accounts are wildly inconsistent, but what's clear is that something was very wrong. Instead of taking her to the hospital, Virginia was moved to a separate hotel room. Several guests came and went. She drifted in and out of consciousness. She moaned, cried, and repeatedly told people that she was in pain. But for days, no one called a doctor. When she finally was taken to a hospital, it was too late. Virginia died on September 9th, 1921, just 4 days after the party. The cause of death was listed as peritonitis from a ruptured bladder, but the condition of her body, combined with the conflicting witness statements, created an avalanche of suspicion. Some said Arbuckle assaulted her, others said she was already ill before the party. Then there were the rumors that she had a history of bladder issues, or that her death was tied to a botched abortion. But none of these stories were ever proven. No matter what the story was, the delay in care is what likely cost her her life. The tragedy wasn't just in how Virginia died, but how quickly her name became twisted, her story buried, and her pain forgotten. The world would never know exactly what happened inside that room, but the story was far from over. Because soon headlines would erupt, and Roscoe Arbuckle would be at the center of one of the biggest scandals Hollywood had ever seen. The investigation into Virginia's death began under intense public pressure. The media had already decided who they thought was guilty, and so had much of the country. But from the beginning, the case was built on unstable ground. The key witness was Maud Delmont, Virginia's friend, who had brought her to the party. She was the first to accuse Arbuckle of assault, telling the police that she heard screams from the bedroom and saw Virginia in distress shortly after. But her credibility fell apart fast. Delmont had a history of fraud, blackmail, and perjury. Her statement changed multiple times, and she was never called to testify at any of the trials. There were no eyewitnesses to what happened in the hotel room, no physical evidence that clearly pointed to an assault, just a tangled web of statements, medical testimony, and theories, many of which contradicted each other. Arbuckle insisted he'd never touched her, and some partygoers backed him up. But others described Virginia as clearly distressed after being alone with him. The investigation quickly spiraled into a media circus. Sensational headlines screamed across the country. Rumors filled the gaps left by weak evidence. Arbuckle's guilt or innocence became almost irrelevant in the face of public outrage. Instead of uncovering the truth, the investigation became a spectacle, a performance for the press, and somewhere in that chaos, whatever actually happened to Virginia was lost. Just days after Virginia's death, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was arrested and charged with manslaughter. The news broke like a tidal wave. Arbuckle wasn't just any actor, he was one of the highest paid stars in the world. A household name, and now he was being accused of something unthinkable. At the center of this accusation was Maud Delmont, the woman who had accompanied Virginia to the party. She told police that Arbuckle had taken Virginia into a private room, locked the door, and screams followed. Delmont claimed Arbuckle had sexually assaulted Virginia and that the assault led to her death. But Delmont's credibility didn't hold up. As I mentioned before, she had a long history of fraud and extortion. She later refused to testify in court. Her story changed multiple times, and the prosecution ultimately distanced itself from her. Still, the damage was done. The media had already spun the case into a full-blown moral panic. Sensational headlines painted Arbuckle as a monstrous figure. Virginia was dragged through the mud, portrayed as unstable, promiscuous, and even manipulative. It was classic character assassination, and what we would call in today's world, victim blaming. The victim, once again, was being erased by the need to make headlines. And while the public gorged itself on scandal, the truth got harder and harder to find. Was this a case of manslaughter, of violence and neglect? Or had Arbuckle been caught in the crosshairs of a moral crusade aimed at punishing Hollywood excess? The law would soon try to decide, but it wouldn't be easy. What followed was less of a search for the truth and more of a spectacle. Because this wasn't just one trial, it was 3. The first trial began in November 1921. The prosecution leaned heavily on the circumstantial evidence, while the defense insisted that Virginia's death had been caused by pre-existing conditions, compounded by alcohol and stress, not an assault. The jury couldn't agree. It ended in a hung jury. 10 voted to acquit, 2 held out for guilt. The second trial was worse, a more aggressive prosecution, more inflammatory headlines, and still no real evidence. The jury again deadlocked. Another mistrial. By the third trial, the tide had turned. The defense brought in stronger medical testimony. They cast serious doubt on the physical claims of abuse. The final jury deliberated for just 6 minutes, 5 of which were spent writing a formal apology to Roscoe Arbuckle. They found him not guilty. But for Arbuckle, the damage was already irreversible. By the time he was acquitted, the public had made up its mind. His films had been banned, studios turned their backs, and even though the court had found him innocent, his name had become synonymous with scandal. A cautionary tale, a pariah, and yet despite the outcome, despite 3 trials and the mountains of press coverage, the one thing we still don't know is what happened in that hotel room. The case may have been closed, but the mystery was not. In many ways, the Arbuckle scandal wasn't just a legal case. It was a psychological storm, not only for the people involved, but for the country watching. Roscoe Arbuckle had built his career on comedy. He was seen as gentle, even childlike, America's funny man. And yet, suddenly, he was being accused of something horrific. Throughout the trials, Arbuckle maintained his innocence. He wept in court. He appeared broken. But was it guilt, shock, or a man crumbling under the weight of the system turning on him? Some psychologists have suggested Arbuckle's behavior was consistent with emotional suppression, a defense mechanism where public figures, especially men, mask fear or guilt behind calm or performative sadness. Others say his distress was genuine and that the case ruined an innocent man. And then there's Virginia, a woman with medical vulnerabilities thrust into a scene where alcohol flowed freely and power dynamics were lopsided. If she was in pain, emotionally or physically, who was there to believe her? Her outcry was written off as hysteria. Her past was weaponized. Her story was lost in a culture that often saw women as either virtuous or corrupt, with no space in between. But the psychology of this case wasn't just confined to the hotel room or a courtroom. It was swept through the press, the public, and the industry. Arbuckle became a symbol, not of guilt necessarily, but of Hollywood's excess. Virginia became a cautionary tale, and the country, still reeling from war and prohibition, was eager to moralize. This wasn't just about truth, it was about control, shame, reputation, and what happens when a system is more interested in assigning blame than understanding what really happened. The story of Virginia Rappe and Roscoe Arbuckle isn't just a Hollywood scandal. It's a reminder of how quickly truth can be lost when power, fame, and fear collide. In the years that followed, Virginia's name was buried beneath scandal, not remembered as a young woman with dreams, a career, and a life cut short, but as the woman who ruined Roscoe Arbuckle. The media painted her as unstable, promiscuous, a party girl who brought trouble on herself. But Virginia was none of those things. She had grown up in poverty. She lost her mother at a young age. She worked hard, first as a model, then as an actress, trying to build a life in a city where women were rarely allowed to fail privately. She had endured physical pain before, bladder problems possibly stemming from a prior illness or pregnancy. But that doesn't explain what happened that weekend. It doesn't excuse how long she was left untreated, and it doesn't justify how she was portrayed after her death. Virginia never got to defend herself. Even now, her story is often told as a footnote in Fatty Arbuckle's fall from grace. But it deserves more than that. She deserves more. Because whatever you believe happened in that hotel suite, the only person who truly paid the price was Virginia. After the trials, Roscoe rarely spoke about Virginia publicly. He remained largely silent about the case, likely on the advice of his attorneys and the trauma of his public shaming. What little he did say painted the entire experience as devastating, not just for his career, but for his psyche. He often referred to the scandal as something that ruined him, and those close to him described him as deeply affected by Rappe's death and his public crucifixion. Even after being cleared by the courts, Hollywood didn't forgive. The Hays Office, Hollywood's moral oversight board, banned his films shortly after the trial. Studios distanced themselves. His films were pulled from theaters, and his reputation remained radioactive. He began working under a pseudonym, William Goodrich, directing short comedies, but he was never allowed to star in front of the camera again during that time. It wasn't until 1932, a decade later, that Warner Brothers offered him a chance to act again in a short series of films. The public response was surprisingly warm. He was planning a comeback, hopeful, even signing a new feature film contract. But the return was short-lived. On June 29, 1933, just one night after celebrating his comeback and signing his new contract, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle died in his sleep of a heart attack. He was 46 years old. In the end, neither Roscoe nor Virginia got to reclaim their story. One was buried by scandal and the other by silence.
Arbuckle's life never recovered. Though he was acquitted, the trial destroyed his career and his name. He went from beloved comedian to industry pariah, almost overnight.
And Virginia? She never got to clear her name. She didn't get a second chance. Her pain was ignored, her voice drowned, and her life reduced to rumors.
Both of their lives became symbols, one of downfall, one of disgrace. But neither symbol tells the full story.
And that's the thing about unsolved cases. Sometimes justice never arrives, and all we're left with is questions.
Arbuckle's story became a lesson in morality for Hollywood. But Virginia's story became a warning that nobody wanted to hear.
Even now, over a century later, the case still feels unsettled, not because of a lack of a verdict, but because of how it unfolded. A woman died, a man destroyed, and the truth may have vanished somewhere in between.
Some crimes are clear-cut. Some are forever tangled in contradiction. And some, like this one, become legend long before anyone finds the truth.
Thank you for joining us for this special crossover episode between The Wanted Files and the Stars of the Golden Age.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow both shows for more forgotten stories, untold truths, and the people behind the headlines.
Until next time, as always, stay curious, stay safe, take care of yourselves and each other.